Welcome to Long Story Short. Today, we are traveling to the paranoid, deeply puritanical colony of Massachusetts to dissect Arthur Miller's explosive play, The Crucible. Imagine a society so utterly rigid, so terrified of the unknown, that a simple childhood game in the woods can trigger a cascade of executions. On the surface, this is a historical drama about the Salem witch trials. But just beneath the surface lies a furious, thinly veiled critique of the United States government. We are going to break down exactly how mass hysteria is weaponized and why one man's refusal to surrender his good name became one of the most powerful moments in American theater. Long story short, The Crucible is not just a play about witches, it is a terrifying autopsy of mob mentality. It shows us that when fear becomes the ultimate currency, the only way to survive is to abandon your morality. And the only way to keep your soul is to accept your own death. First, we must establish the context, because understanding why Arthur Miller wrote this play in 1953 is the key to passing your exam. During the 1950s, America was gripped by the Red Scare, a frantic terror of communism. A politician named Senator Joseph McCarthy led a government committee that dragged writers, actors, and directors into court, demanding to know if they were communists. If you were accused, the only way to save your career was to confess, apologize, and give the committee the names of other alleged communists. Miller watched his friends betray each other out of sheer terror. He realized that the exact same psychological warfare happened in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. Let's dive into the plot. The story opens in Salem, 1692. The town's deeply unpopular minister, Reverend Parris, has caught his teenage niece, Abigail Williams, and his young daughter dancing in the woods around a fire with his enslaved servant, Tituba. Dancing is strictly forbidden in this Puritan society. Out of sheer terror of being punished, Paris's daughter falls into a psychological, catatonic state. Instantly, the whisper of witchcraft spreads through the town like wildfire. Enter our main antagonist, Abigail Williams. Abigail is brilliant, utterly ruthless, and a master manipulator. She realizes that if she confesses to playing with dark magic, she will be whipped. But if she claims she was attacked by witches, she becomes a victim. Even more dangerously, she becomes a saint. Abigail has a very specific, dark motivation. Before the play begins, she worked as a servant for a respected local farmer named John Proctor. Proctor is our flawed protagonist. He is a strong, independent man who hates the hypocrisy of the town. But he committed a fatal sin. He had a brief affair with the teenage Abigail. When his wife, Elizabeth Proctor, found out, she fired Abigail and kicked her out into the street. Abigail is deeply, dangerously obsessed with John, and she wants Elizabeth dead so she can take her place. To deflect the blame from herself, Abigail and the other local girls begin screaming and pointing fingers at the most vulnerable women in town, claiming they saw them with the devil. The town imports a supposed expert on witchcraft, Reverend Hale. Hale arrives with heavy books loaded with religious authority, completely validating the girls' hysterical claims. The jails begin to fill up. By Act 2, the terror has reached the Proctor household. The tension between John and Elizabeth is incredibly heavy. John is desperate to earn back his wife's trust, but Elizabeth's heart is still cold from the betrayal. Their argument is interrupted when their new servant, Mary Warren, returns from the courthouse. She hands Elizabeth a small rag doll, a Poppet that she sewed to pass the time during the trials. Moments later, court officials arrive to arrest Elizabeth. Abigail has accused her of using black magic. The officials find the Poppet, and buried deep inside the stomach of the doll is a sewing needle. Earlier that night, Abigail had violently stabbed herself in the stomach with a needle at dinner, claiming Elizabeth's spirit pushed it in. The Poppet is taken as absolute, irrefutable proof of voodoo. Elizabeth is chained and taken away in the back of a wagon. John Proctor is pushed past his breaking point. He vows to tear the court down to save his wife. This brings us to the devastating courtroom scene in Act 3. The court is run by Deputy Governor Danforth. Danforth is the ultimate symbol of rigid, blind authority. He operates on a terrifying binary logic. You are either entirely with the court or you are entirely against it. There is no middle ground. Proctor brings Mary Warren to the stand, forcing her to admit that the girls are completely faking it. But Abigail is too powerful. She turns the courtroom into a theater of absolute chaos. She and the girls pretend to freeze to death, claiming Mary Warren is sending a freezing wind. Then they look up at the ceiling and scream, claiming Mary has turned into a giant yellow bird that is coming down to tear their eyes out. The hysteria is so overwhelming that Mary Warren breaks. Terrified of Abigail in the court, Mary turns around and points her finger directly at John Proctor, calling him the devil's man. In a final desperate attempt to ruin Abigail's credibility, Proctor throws away his own reputation. He publicly confesses to the affair. He screams to the judge that Abigail is a whore and that she is only doing this to murder his wife. To test this claim, Danforth brings Elizabeth Proctor out of the jail. Elizabeth has never told a lie in her entire life. Danforth asks her directly if her husband committed the crime of lechery. Elizabeth looks at John, wanting desperately to protect his good name. She lies. She says no. With that single tragic lie, John's testimony is destroyed. Proctor is arrested. In a fit of absolute despair, he screams at the judges, "God is dead. You are pulling heaven down and raising up a whore." Months pass. It is the morning John Proctor is scheduled to hang. The town is falling apart. Cows are wandering the streets, and crops are rotting in the fields because so many people are locked in the dungeons. Reverend Hale has returned, but he is a broken man. He realizes the court is entirely corrupt, and he is desperately begging the prisoners to falsely confess to witchcraft. Hale argues that life is God's most precious gift, and that God will forgive a lie if it saves a life. Proctor is brought out. He is filthy and starved. He wants to live. He agrees to give a false confession. Danforth makes him sign a piece of paper and then tells Proctor that the paper will be nailed to the church door for the entire town to see. Proctor freezes. He has given them his soul by lying, but he refuses to give them his name. In the most iconic monologue of the play, Proctor snatches the paper back and tears it to shreds. When Danforth asks him why, Proctor cries out, "Because it is my name. Because I cannot have another in my life. Because I lie and sign myself to lies. How may I live without my name? I have given you my soul. Leave me my name." Proctor chooses to hang, but in doing so, he regains his goodness. He walks to the gallows with his head held high, refusing to compromise his integrity for a corrupt society. Clears throat. To guarantee an A on your final essay, you need to master 3 foundational symbols and themes from this text. First, the title itself. A crucible is a piece of laboratory equipment. It is a severe, heavy vessel designed to withstand tremendous heat in order to melt down metals and separate the pure elements from the worthless dross. The town of Salem is the crucible. The hysteria and the trials are the intense heat. By the end of the play, the heat burns away all the hypocrisy and lies, revealing the absolute pure gold of John Proctor's moral character. Second, the Poppet. The ragdoll Mary Warren gives to Elizabeth is a brilliant symbol of how easily innocence can be weaponized. A child's toy is manipulated by Abigail to represent dark, murderous magic. It shows how In a paranoid society, innocent actions are twisted by corrupt people to destroy their enemies. If the court wants to see the devil, they will find him in a sewing needle. Third, the concept of naming names. In the play, just like in the 1950s McCarthy hearings, the court is not satisfied with a personal confession. They demand that the accused give the names of other people they saw with the devil. This is a deliberate mechanism to destroy community trust. When John Proctor refuses to name others, he is breaking the chain of hysteria. He is refusing to buy his own life with the blood of his neighbors. The ultimate takeaway for your finals? The Crucible is a warning about the fragility of justice. It proves that when the law demands impossible perfection, it forces decent people to become liars just to survive. If you have a paper or a test coming up, watching a summary gets you the plot. But reading Arthur Miller's actual dialogue is where you master the material. Click the Amazon or Audible link in the description to get the full version of The Crucible right now. That is the long story short. Please like and subscribe for more literature breakdowns. See you in the next one.